reminders. There is photography allowed. There's no flash, so please turn the flash off. For cell phones, please have your phones on vibrate or silent. If you need to take a call, you can totally take it outside. And also, for any questions, please go to the, there's a microphone in the center of the room. Please have any questions asked from that microphone. This is being broadcast live, so no one can hear you live on the live feed if you're not at the microphone. So that's it. Enjoy.
Okay, can everybody hear me now? So? All right. Hi there. My name is Paul Constant. I'm the books editor at The Stranger. Before we get started, I want to thank Emerald City Comic Con for hosting this event, and I especially want to thank you for coming to this panel. We know there are hundreds of other places you could be at the Comic Con, so we really appreciate you taking your time out of your schedules to come to this event. So, last year, Fantagraphics co-publisher Kim Thompson passed away. With founder Gary Groth, Thompson established the Fantagraphics aesthetic, editing and publishing only high-quality work from the finest cartoonists. Thompson also championed the translation and publication of international comics work, bringing Louis Trondheim, Jason, and many other beloved European comics artists to America. Thompson's death was a serious blow for Fantagraphics. Aside from the obvious heartbreak of losing a friend and longtime coworker, Fantagraphics lost its chief translator and a major editorial force. He was working on 13 upcoming books at the time of his death, putting a large financial burden on the publisher. Fantagraphics held a wildly successful Kickstarter campaign to pre-fund the publication of its spring list of 39 titles, and many of those books are starting to hit bookshelves now. And so here we are. We're going to take a look at where Fantagraphics is and where they're headed as a company. I'm going to direct the conversation for a while, but we'll have plenty of time to address your questions too. So think them up, and I will let you know when it's time to line up at the microphone. And now let's meet the panel.
Stretch over here. Meet the panel.
Do you want to put it over here? Gary Groth is the president, publisher, and co-founder of Fantagraphics. Eric Reynolds is the associate publisher of Fantagraphics and has worked for the company since 1993. Kristy Valenti is an editor for Fantagraphics who's been with the company since 2003. Recently, she's edited and contributed to the Comics Journal. And Trina Robbins, Pretty in Ink, North American Women Cartoonists, 1896 to 2013. And at some point, Mike Catron will join us. Somewhere. If he does show up, he co-founded Fantagraphics in 1976 with Gary, left the company in the early 80s, and returned as an editor in 2011.
But may be missing now.
He might be gone forever. We don't know. So first off, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Kickstarter. What sort of financial situation were you in at the point where you decided to do that?
Well, we were in great financial shape. That's why we did it. No, just, long story short is that when Kim stopped working, which was literally around February of last year, so over a year ago, when he was diagnosed with lung cancer. And he virtually stopped working the day he was diagnosed. And he had about 13, 14, 15 books in queue, all foreign translations. Books essentially only he could do because he was translating them as well. And we were slowly losing ground over 2013. I couldn't quite figure out why we were doing that until I realized that we weren't publishing those books. And even though those books were mostly relatively low-selling books, they were still bringing income into the company. They were still helping to pay overhead and things like that. And so at some point I realized that, and we needed an infusion of cash. And I thought the Kickstarter, was the best way to do that.
Was there much resistance inside the company to the idea when?
No.
It took me a little while to wrap my head around it at first, because I'm always a little more sensitive, I think, to like what people are going to think on the outside.
Which is not saying much, given my lack of sensitivity.
Right. So it took me a while too, but Gary had a pretty good idea and handle on the whole thing right from the get-go, and he was pretty persuasive.
Also, Jen Vaughn, one of our coworkers, did an amazing job helping with the Kickstarter. She's experienced with Kickstarters for her own projects, and she really knew what to do and brought her experience to that and came up with a lot of really cool rewards and projects.
And how's the fulfillment process going? I know a lot of people sort of start to drop the ball when it comes to fulfilling the...
Oh, it's proceeding apace. T-shirts are being printed now.
Okay.
We sold a lot of prints by our artists, and those are going to start being printed next week. The prints have to be printed, then shipped to the artist to be signed, and then the artist sent it back to the Fantagraphics office, and then we ship it out to the consumer. So that's going to be, a 5 or 6 week process.
Okay.
Starting about now, but and we've already fulfilled some.
Several hundred, if not
yeah.
over 1,000 items already.
Wow.
Yeah, in fact, Stephanie Rivers, who's in the room, she's been working on these really cool custom Converse kicks that are like painted. Like, it's actually been really amazing because it turns out everyone in the entire office is an artist except for me. Mike Bear, our marketing person, has been doing amazing art. Steph Olchek, one of our customer service people, Dave Holmes. Apparently, everybody can draw amazingly in the entire office except for me.
And me.
We should just
We
like
could have like a drawing
No.
contest. Who could draw worse?
see, but at least it be coming from you. So I'd love to like do someone's self-portrait and then just have them be like, oh.
I'm sure somebody would buy that. Do you think that crowdfunding is something that comics publishing can lean on more in the future? Is it something that you were tempted to focus on in the future?
Well, it's easier than getting a bank loan. So, if we ever found ourselves in a position where we needed an infusion of cash, I think it's a great way to do it. And you're giving the readers something for their money. It's not like you're just asking for, give us money, which, I wouldn't object to necessarily, but we are giving value for money, as, most people who engage in Kickstarters or Indiegogo and, any of those crowdsourcing places do. So, but it's a way to do it, almost instantaneously. I think we did it over 30 days.
Yeah.
And, if we just had a sale or something like that, that wouldn't have happened.
Right.
So it, in effect, creates an event.
Okay.
And it works.
Yeah, one of the things that I didn't quite foresee with the effects of the Kickstarter were just how effective it was at promoting the individual books that were in that season. It really generated some attention towards those books in a way that doesn't usually happen until a little closer to publication date. So that was actually kind of a cool thing about it. And I think we did a really great job of coming up with creative premiums that made it worthwhile, which is,
definitely.
I think, a huge part of it.
I think once it started, we realized that we are in effect promoting our books and our authors by doing that as well. So that was a nice side benefit.
So getting a little bit into the process of publication, I tend to categorize your titles into a few different categories. There's the reprints and the histories, the translations, the new work by the artists you've been working with for years, and the work by new artists. Do you ever feel institutionally that you're leaning too hard into one category of books, like too many reprints, and then that you have to correct your course? Is there sort of a grand plan to the timing of how you release things, or is it when they're ready?
We try to balance it out every season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to understand that our mandate, really from the beginning, was to publish good cartooning. And I think originally, Kim and I didn't really make a distinction between like the Hernandez brothers and Hal Foster. It was all good cartooning to us. And we didn't realize 30, 35 years ago that each of these categories, and we categorize them the same way you just did in-house, but each of these categories has their own sort of separate audience. But they all fit into the single category of great, masterful cartooning. So what we do every season is we just look at what all of our options are. Look at what cartoonists we're planning on publishing, and try to make it a good mix of classic, contemporary, underground, different generations.
And how are you finding new work to translate now? I imagine that's one of the departments that has undergone the.
Well, we aren't. I'm just trying to get the work that we have already committed ourselves to translated. So I'm not looking at new work specifically. I'm really working on getting all the books that were in queue done.
Okay.
But
finding translators.
But it still happens the same way as it always has, which is relatively organically. Kim had a lot of favorites from the kind of Franco-Belgian albums of his youth that he very much targeted to publish in America. But there was also a lot of contemporary work that any of us found from going to conventions overseas or whatever, and then we would come back, and Kim might be the one who actually would sit down and read it because he understood the language, but we'd have an idea of like, oh, this looks really interesting. Like Uli Lust's book came about that way, a graphic novel called Today is the Last Day of the Rest of Your Life. I went to a convention in Stockholm about 3 years ago and met her there, and she just showed me the book, and I just said, this looks amazing. And she gave me a copy. I brought it back. I couldn't read it because it was in German. So I gave it to Kim, and he eventually got to it in his reading pile and was like, this is great. We got to do this. And it's not any more mysterious than that, really.
Have you ever found anything that looked amazing but turned out to be complete tripe when it was?
Yeah. There's a lot. I mean, actually, that's, I think, trickier with a lot of the European stuff because a lot of the kind of French albums, for example, they all look beautiful. There's a really high quality level of craft involved with all of these in a way that I don't think there is with the traditional Marvel and DC kind of mainstream comics. And so they all look pretty, but then you read it and you find out it's just some, kind of dopey, fantasy serial or something like that.
Okay. And then on the reprint side, your new EC Comics reprints, for example, are gorgeous. There have been so many EC Comics reprints over the years. What convinced you that these were comics that you could sell, that you could make a space for?
Well, when I pitched the idea of reprinting the EC books to the EC rights holders, my idea was to repackage all of the books by artist. They've only, and maybe I should mention, just for the benefit of those who don't know, EC Comics was a line of comics that were published in the early to mid 1950s and are generally considered to be the most consistently highest quality mainstream comics ever published. They published genres such as science fiction, horror, war, suspense, and they included some of the best comic artists in the history of the medium. But they've always only ever been published as facsimile editions of the comics. So it would be by comic title. So you would have collections of Crypt of Terror or Weird Science Fantasy or, just specific titles. So my idea was to collect them by artist. So we have a Johnny Craig volume, we have a Harvey Kurtzman volume, we have a Wally Wood volume, Jack Davis, and so on. And I thought it would be a new way of packaging these and trying to reach outside of the traditional EC Comics fan. So we would distribute these in bookstores. We're actually bringing them up by genre. So Wally Wood, for example, could have a science fiction comic. Jack Davis will have a horror comic. Most of the artists specialize in a specific genre, although, they would cross genres. So you'd have 2 volumes. Harvey Kurtzman will have a science fiction book as well as a war book. So I thought it was a new way of introducing EC Comics to people, younger people who may not be aware of them. And doing it by artist and genre, I thought, provided a certain sort of market angle by which we could sell them.
Well, they are gorgeous, and I bought plenty of.
Yeah, Jacob Covey initiated the design, and he just did a fabulous job of reimagining these. So he's kind of bringing them into the 21st century.
Yeah, I've bought plenty of the facsimile editions over the years, but I've never seen them in black and white, which was really striking. In the fall, you had the first of 2 new travel books by Lucy Knisley, who's a cartoonist I see is being clearly of a different generation than the artists we think of as being part of the Fantagraphics stable, like Jim Woodring and the Hernandez brothers. Knisley is someone who I've watched come up from sort of the little leagues of webcomics to being published by major publishers before being recruited by Fantagraphics. Do you have a specific approach to finding younger artists? Are you more likely to prefer someone who you discover, or do you like to find people who've been published by other publishers?
Well, we really don't look to other publishers to find artists. Usually comics is a small community, and when an artist of some, significant stature arises, you're aware of it. You see them at conventions, you see the work coming out, you might see them on the internet.
Sorry to interrupt, but the biggest advocate of cartoonists are cartoonists. Like every show, a cartoonist will run up to you and be like, "Have you seen this cartoonist work?" So
Yeah. The grapevine. But we publish a lot of cartoonists now in their 20s and 30s. Simon Hanselman. We have a new book by Eleanor Davis coming out. That I literally sent to the printer yesterday. An Age of License by Lucy Nisley. Actually, that was submitted to us.
Okay.
And I was familiar with, she actually published a book with First Second. And so because she actually had a publisher, she is not someone I would have approached, because I thought, well, she has a publisher. But due to various circumstances, she sent this book to us. And that's just one way of doing it. Eleanor Davis appeared in Mome, for example. We're publishing a number of artists who have appeared in Mome, which Eric edited for 3 years.
6.
another thing
Felt
is,
like 3.
we were publishing about 100 books a year, so we actually move very quickly for a publisher. I think we move more quickly than maybe a more established book publisher, because I think they have seasons, and they really plan things out like 2-3 years. And I talked to a lot of small press cartoonists who've worked with big book publishers and book publishers that are smaller like us, and some of the things they love about publishing with these smaller publishers is the work gets out. It's very quick, because we're so used to, a lot of people have been working in comics since since they were more of like a periodical. So a lot of times we think like get the book out quickly.
We plan things 2-3 weeks.
Well, I'm just saying, like, there's an appeal to like a more immediate publishing, I think, for a lot of cartoonists.
Is that specifically, do you think, because Fantagraphics comes from a sort of a, well, not monthly, I don't know if any of your...
Well,
I think it's because we're mean and lean.
Yeah, it's also, part of it is the nature of the comic book industry versus the book industry, the actual distribution ends of those. We come more from the comic book background, where you turn things around in 2 or 3 months from the point you announce it till you publish it. Since we've been, with W.W. Norton, our book trade distributor, frankly, we kind of try to have it both ways a little bit. Like Kristy was saying, we do work pretty fast on things, but we also do plan stuff out, a year to a year and a half in advance. And so you're kind of trying to have it both ways, coming from those 2 different ends of the publishing spectrum.
One of your biggest fall titles is a huge 2-volume hardcover collected edition of Zap Comics, which is obviously a big deal for comics history. And you must be working with a lot of comic book royalty to get this book together. Can you share a little insight with us into what the process is like on that book?
Oh, yeah. I'm literally working on that now, and I've been working on it for the last, I've been working on it for the last 6 months, but real hard for the last month. For those of you, again, who don't know, Zap is the comic that was created by Robert Crumb in 1968. It didn't start the underground comics movement, but it was probably the most symbolic comic that defines the underground comics movement. It's been published from 1968, and the latest issue of the comic will actually be published in the collection, and the last issue of the comic, number 16. There'll be 17 issues in the comic because it started with number 0. And the artists are Robert Crumb, S. Clay Wilson, Robert Williams, Victor Moscoso, Spain Rodriguez, Paul Mavridis, Paul Mavridis, and Gilbert Shelton and Rick Griffin, which is sort of like a pantheon of underground cartoonists. And Paul, you said it was going to be a 2-volume set. It's actually going to be a 5-volume set.
Oh.
Yeah, we changed it.
Okay.
It's going to be a 5-volume set. It's going to have a jewel box in it of Giclée prints of every one of the covers of the comics, reproduced from proof sheets. And there will be a special edition where I hope 6 of the artists will do a sign print in it. And yeah, it's I've been putting this together for quite some time now, and we're scanning from the negatives of the comics, so this will be the best reproduction of Zap comics ever published. We've actually compared the printed copies of Zap to what we're getting, we're getting from the files, and they're startlingly better. I mean, so much more detail, much crisper reproduction. And this is a landmark in the history of comics. I think it's probably, aesthetically speaking, the most important comic series ever published.
It's been super fun working with the interns on this book because they've never seen this art before, and it blows their minds. And it's super fun watching.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, but it's really interesting because I've been having to give them like a 2-sentence cultural contextualization because they're just like, whoa. And I am like, okay, at the time, they had the comics code, people were not allowed, like people had never seen anything like this. Like they were deliberately breaking every single taboo. And so it's really over the top, it's really extreme. And once you tell people like they had to do this because they had to just destroy the taboos and, pave the way for what would happen afterwards, then I think people get it. But just there's like a minute of like, what's going on? There are crazy pirates and lots of other things. And there's a daughter in the front row, so I won't talk about those. But
It's fascinating that we live in this era of, transgressive pop culture where you've got things like South Park, you've got, movies like Nymphomaniac opening up, and, boundaries are being broken in every media, yet comics have sort of gone almost the other way. They've like kind of become a little more restrained in their mores or attitudes, and so that doesn't surprise me that like they've probably never seen anything like this in comics before because no one's making comics like that except for maybe a couple of people.
And it's interesting because they've seen like, maybe like naughty manga or things like that. So they've seen, there's a lot of things that aren't shocking, but this is very shocking, and it's fun to watch people just engage with it, and then people get super intrigued by it. It's like anything that, I don't know, maybe as a reader when my mind gets messed with, I then immediately turn around and fall in love with it, and I've been seeing that happen a lot with people, and that's been
S. Clay Wilson's work is so intense and so troubling that Robert Crumb said it liberated him in his cartooning, and sort of allowed him to do what he did subsequent to that. And I think it was, I forget what issue Joe Blow was in, but one of the issues of Zap was actually prosecuted for obscenity in upstate New York.
Yeah, people were going to prison for this in the 60s. Like, it was like they had to hide from the police. They had to hide the comics. Like, the police were after them. So it was like a very subversive act. It was a big act of free speech. And I think if you don't really know sort of the mindset of that time, you look at this stuff and it's just good to know what was going on.
Yeah, we're hoping for some media events where a few people will go to prison upon publication.
So you have all these big personalities from the 60s and the 70s, and I assume they own the rights to their work.
All the artists own their own rights. Right?
Yeah. So did you have to chase anybody down in any like ayahuasca fields in the mountains of Chile or something?
Well, the contract.
Maybe.
All the artists in Zap or their widows, I guess several of the artists are dead. All of them had to agree. All of them had to and have to agree to everything. So it had, there's a consensus, and so all of them had to sign the same contract. That took about a year to negotiate. So yes, in effect, it was like herding cats and then putting the cats into a room and getting all the cats to agree on something.
Some of the cats are high on ayahuasca at the time.
And now they're all voting on various facets of the book.
Okay. And this is coming out in the fall. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Can't wait to see it. A lot of my friends who are booksellers have told me that Ed Piskor's Hip Hop Family Tree has been selling out at their stores in numbers that they didn't foresee, and it landed on the New York Times bestseller list last week. Is this something that you sort of saw coming? Have you been taken by surprise by this, or?
We thought it would be successful, but it's exceeded our expectations.
So both.
So both.
Are you in danger of having to go to print and being out of it for a little while? Should people track it down while it's out there? Or?
They certainly should track it down right
Yeah,
now.
We're at booth 207. If you go
are
down,
copies
yeah,
there
you
right
can
now.
buy it 207.
But no, we are already almost out of the existing stock and have another printing on the way.
And we have the cool box set. Do you guys want to talk about that?
Yeah, first of all, we've almost blown through the second printing of the book. It is now being printed reprinted a third time. And in this fall, we will have a 2-volume box set of volumes 1 and 2. Volume 2 will be out in August, and the box set of 1 and 2 is going to be out in September or October.
Should also mention on the first Saturday of May is Free Comic Book Day, and we're doing a Hip Hop Family Tree comic book that has some new material that's not in either book, and also selections from each of the first 2 books. So that's a great way to sort of scratch that itch if you aren't able to get a copy right now. I had a slideshow prepared that we had some
Where is the
technical
slideshow?
difficulties, but I had it on there. But we're doing that and
I don't know if we can plug it
a
in.
Don
Maybe
Rosa.
plug it in if you
Yeah.
We have no slideshow.
Yeah, we can plug it in. Maybe we can just scroll through it really quickly.
The hip hop box set, by the way, will include a special comic insert that Ed did just specifically for the box set. It's this terrifying comic that's an homage to Image Comics of the '90s. That has a hip hop theme. And
it's specifically it's about
Rob Liefeld's-
In the mid-'90s, Spike Lee directed a Levi's jeans commercial starring Rob Liefeld that some of you people my age might remember. And it's sort of...
but mercifully won't.
It's for Buttonfly Levi's.
yeah, that's right.
That is what it's
So
for.
it's sort of like the point where, like this epic point where hip-hop and comic book culture sort of crossed over. And apparently it led to Rob Liefeld meeting Eazy-E and having some meetings about collaborating on some stuff that I don't think ever quite materialized. But so it's just, there's a lot of weird little interesting trivia about it.
I was flipping through your catalog and I came across an illustration of Cable, and it seemed to me that '90s Fantagraphics might have self-immolated if they had ever published anything that looked anything like Rob Liefeld's art. So it felt like a real sort of transition to me.
We might self-immolate yet.
Yeah.
That comes out, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I saw the pages as Ed was producing them. It was really terrifying.
It's coming back. Some people are taking that 90s aesthetic and they're incorporating it in their comics, like Ben Mara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Free Comic Book Day issue, which I've seen, has a cover that is takeoff on Marvel Comics anniversary covers from like 1989, something
Yeah,
like that.
something like
yeah, yeah. It's just it's kind of mind blowing to see Fantagraphics putting that out.
I thought so too.
How has digital comics done for Fantagraphics so far? Is that something you're willing to talk about?
It's doing well and it's growing. We only started getting our books on as ebooks and available digitally about a year and a half ago or so, and we put more titles on every month, and it's growing. I mean, it started off slow and it's been growing every month.
And do you foresee a time when you might go the Image Comics route and sell them as DRM-free books through your own site, or is that something that
You know what? I can't say I've even thought about that. I mean, I see a time when we could sell some books digitally and other books in print. I mean, if we publish a book in print, we're obviously probably going to do it simultaneously digitally. But I also see a time when we might just do some digital comics, books that might not sell well enough to warrant print. I haven't confirmed this because I haven't talked to all the guys about it, but I think we're going to make available all of the individual Zap issues digitally for people who can't afford the gigantic box set. And just want to read the comics, they can buy the digital versions.
Okay. I mean, to answer your specific question, I would love to get to that point. And quite honestly, it was more of a path of least resistance to not go that way out of the gate.
Sure.
And since we've only really been actively trying to sell digital comics for, like Gary said, about a year and a half, it just sort of took us that long just to get started and get going. With Comixology and a few other suppliers that, the sort of back end stuff that involved with us selling our own DRM free, we just haven't gone there yet. But I'd like to.
One of the very first times I read about e-comics was an issue of Comics Journal that was specifically devoted to webcomics, and it was just so exciting. And I wasn't even on the internet that much at that point. I didn't even have an email address until 2000, so I sort of got on board late. But it was really thrilling, and there was stuff that couldn't be printed, in its form. It was intended to be digital. Is that something that you've ever considered? Getting into? Is books that can't be published as books that exist primarily as webcomics?
Well, I mean, it's something I've thought about, but I haven't actually acted on. I mean, one thing I want to do, I mean, I talked about this briefly with Eric literally a few weeks ago, is I'm interested in publishing some books that would have very low print runs. They'd be sort of customized books with print runs between 1 and 500 copies, which you can't do on a mass basis. A minimum print run for a book that you sell in a bookstore is maybe 2,000 copies. It's economically unfeasible to do anything shorter than that. But we get work in that I look at, that I think is good, that I think is interesting, and ought to be available for people, for the few people who want to buy them. But I know they're only going to sell 300 copies or 500 copies or something like that, and I'm working on a way to actually make that happen.
Okay. This is sort of backtracking a little bit, but I just saw something in the slideshow that reminded me. Are your Disney reprints continuing as planned now that Marvel is owned by Disney? Does that affect anything for you?
No, it didn't affect anything at all.
Okay.
We're continuing to publish the Disney books. In fact, you probably know that we just signed up the Don Rosa, Donald Duck, and Uncle Scrooge series. Don's here at the convention, by the way. And the first volume of that's going to be out in about 2 to 3 months. So we're actually publishing more Disney material than ever.
Don Rosa is a JJ08. I answered that question a lot yesterday, so I'm prepared.
It's beautiful stuff. The Free Comic Book Day issue this year is one of his, and it's an amazing story. I loved. Yeah, it was just mind blowing.
Isn't the coloring amazing? We're recoloring all of Don Rosa's work to accord with his wishes. And he told me it was the first time that any publisher, he's been published in the United States, he's been published all over Europe and Scandinavian countries, and it's the first time when the coloring is precisely to his liking.
Yeah. Okay. So over the course of Fantagraphics' life, you've gone from sort of the punk rock outsider artist to a publisher with, I think, literary credibility. Has the embrace of bookstores and traditional publishing affected you from the inside, or do you feel like you're still doing the same sort of thing?
Both. It was an enormous transition from, we were distributed exclusively in the comics market for years. And we started being distributed in bookstores in 1988. But the first 10 years of that were really faltering because bookstores and consumers did not know what a graphic novel was. They didn't even know the concept of a graphic novel. So we really took off when we were distributed by W.W. Norton in around 2002, I think. And we finally got penetration in the bookstore market. They finally started distributing us well in the book trade. And that's always what we wanted to do. I mean, as far back as at least 86, when we were publishing collections of Love and Rockets. We published the complete Crumb comics, I think, in 1987. We always wanted to be distributed in bookstores because we thought we wanted to get outside the comics market. We wanted to get outside the hardcore fanatical fans, which were very important to us, but we also wanted to expand our reach. And we wanted to sort of evangelize on behalf of these comics and these authors and get out to, people who just read novels and read fiction and so on. We thought that our books were good enough and appealing enough to people outside the comics market. So that shift, which was sort of a long shift, is what we've always wanted to do and what we always sort of were aiming for. And it allowed us to publish the kinds of books we're doing now.
And it's significant because I started reading comics in the library. I started reading Fantagraphics comics in 1997, and I couldn't get comics, these kinds of comics anywhere but in the library. And I think it's good because, one, you get a diverse group of people who are reading these books. I was reading a diverse sort of books. I was reading superhero comics, and I was reading newspaper strips, and I was reading, Love and Rockets, and foreign comics that Fantagraphics had published. So I think the fact that we have always been in the bookstore market is great. And I think it's helping us reach more people, especially now that the bookstore market is pretty amenable to so many things that we do.
Mm-hmm. Do you miss publishing this sort of you don't publish very many of the sort of, people call them floppies and things like that. Is that something that you regret moving out of at all, or?
I might have a different answer than other people. I do.
That's
I
right.
definitely do. I feel like there's something about the comic book that is a very valuable thing, both as a reader growing up and also as a cartoonist, developing your style and sort of honing your craft. I think about my cartoonists that I have grown up with and sort of adore the most, like Dan Clowes and Chester Brown, neither of whom, it's hard to imagine them having the career that they've had without starting out doing comic books and sort of figuring out what works and what doesn't. I just read a great book about Chester Brown's Yummy Fur by a writer named Brian Evanson that talked a lot about that, about how his graphic novels that are in print now are really sort of finely chiseled things that have been edited down to what they are, that were originally published in comic book form, and there's so much stuff that's excised, it's been redrawn. He obviously, that was like his minor leagues, where he was sort of getting his feet wet and figuring things out, and then for the eventual permanent, book collection. And now everybody's just diving right into the book. Everybody wants to make the great American graphic novel right as soon as they graduate from college, and and I got some concerns about whether that's a healthy thing or not.
You've also seen Seattle embrace Fantagraphics in a way that I think would have been unthinkable 15 years ago. Fantagraphics was a big part of Seattle's recent application to the UNESCO City of Literature program, for example.
We were.
And do you feel more like a part of the fabric of the city these days?
Yeah.
Do you feel more like a Seattle publisher than you used to, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I guess I feel like we've become an institution.
Yeah,
in
we're like
Seattle.
the last men standing, or men and women standing. Yeah, it's weird. I think I was talking to you about this the other day, that when I first moved here in 1993, very few people knew what Fantagraphics was, and so I don't take it for granted that that people do now, and that people at Emerald City want to come out and hear us talk and come to the books. People come visit Seattle from out of town and want to go to the Fantagraphics bookstore in Georgetown. That's a pretty amazing thing that that makes me proud of Seattle. That because I'm proud of what we do, and I'm proud that Seattle embraces what we do. It's a pretty special thing that I don't think would necessarily happen everywhere else.
Yeah, and in fact didn't happen everywhere else.
Right.
And there was a comic scene when you came out in '93, but it's sort of died down in the early 2000s, but now there feels like there's another Seattle scene on the way. I know that your bookstore is hosting a release party for Intruder number 10, which is a great local anthology that you don't publish, but is this something that you think that Fantagraphics can sort of take part in shaping? And did you do that? Do you feel like you were part of it before in the late '90s when Tom Hart and so many other people whose names I'm blanking on right now were in town and doing work?
Well, we arrived in Seattle in 1989, and a number of cartoonists actually arrived around the same time we did. Jim Woodring. We moved up from Los Angeles. And Jim Woodring lived in Los Angeles, and Roberta Gregory lived in Los Angeles, and I think it was coincidental that they moved up within months of our moving up. And then just this play in the 90s, and Peter Bagg was already here. He's the one who advocated that we move to Seattle. And there was just, it was like a magnet for cartoonists in the 90s. And I think that, my impression is that sort of abated in the 2000s. And is been coming back over the last few years.
And then there's the Short Run Festival too, so that's a fun.
Yeah, everything is reaching sort of critical mass. We started our store 5 years ago, six years ago. So I think that sort of helped cultivate a more communal sense of
having a place
comics.
is important. Yeah.
There was a weird period in the early 90s where it seemed like there was, a cartoonist that you knew of, moving here, every week, it seemed like literally, it was
And half of them worked for us for a while.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So we didn't really, shape the community, but, we're definitely part
Maybe
of,
we
part
were
of the
something
fabric
of
it,
Maybe we were something of a catalyst just being there.
When I moved here, Jeremy Eaton moved here within a couple of months of me, Al Columbia, Ed Brubaker had just moved here, Jeff Johnson moved here, Rich Tomaso. It was just it's like every month it was like, oh, guess who's coming to town? Yeah.
And Joe Sacco worked for Fantagraphics, and Bill
In LA.
In
Bill
LA.
Willingham. Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah.
Bill Willingham was up here for a while, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Des
Oh, yeah.
Peebles?
Yeah. I would host parties at my place, and 50, 60 people would show up, most of them cartoonists.
And this is going to be my last question, so if you have any questions for Fantagraphics, feel free to line up at the mic in the middle of the room while we're taking care of this. When I read the Comics Journal as a teenager in the mid-'90s, I enjoyed the fact that there was a lot of simmering anger coming off the page, and
You missed the 80s. That's,
yeah, well, no, I went back and read the 80s and loved it also. And I don't get that kind of seething anger and contempt from you anymore. And does that have to do with where you are as a company? Have you matured, or are mainstream comics easier for you to ignore now, or are you less angry?
I think you're just as angry.
Yeah, it's all, it's all internal. I just don't express it as much. There were, in the 80s and 90s, there were battles to be fought and battles to be won. And to some extent, I think a lot of those battles have been won. One of the things we did, one of the things the Comics Journal did was to champion the rights and the integrity of artists. And I think to a large extent, the status quo now accepts that as a given, or at least a significant portion of the comics community. And yeah, it's a lot easier for me to ignore mainstream comics. Partly it's just age. I just don't have the time, the wherewithal, the energy, or the interest to keep track of all the depredations that are occurring in mainstream comics. I just don't have the energy for that anymore. Whereas in the in the 80s and the early 90s, I did. But I think a large part of it is that a lot of what we were fighting for has come to pass. Book publishers are now publishing cartoonists. Cartoonists are getting contracts that respect them and their rights and their autonomy as artists. So a lot of what we fought for in the 80s and 90s have become the status quo.
Are you declaring victory right here? Is this something? Good night.
You won comics.
No, I would never do that. No.
Are you hopeful about the comics industry today?
You know, I'm not even sure I know what that means, hopeful for the comics industry. I mean, probably not. I mean...
How about the comics
hopeful
art
for
form?
Fantagraphics.
I mean, the comics art form has some stuff
Yeah.
going
Well,
on.
yeah, I
The
mean, I
art
don't even
form
think
is-
you have to be hopeful for the comics art form. I mean,
Right.
it's thriving, it's vital. It's probably more vital now than it's ever been.
Yeah.
There are probably more talented cartoonists working today than possibly ever in the history of comics. You know, I mean, you have the last, like, 2 generations of cartoonists still working. And then, you know, a new generation, you know, who are building upon all those foundations.
I guess, sort of hone my question then. If somebody came to you and they wanted to start a comic book publishing company, and they were smart people, would you tell them to do it, or would you advise them away from it?
Depends on the person, I guess.
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I mean, if they were, you know, young and enthusiastic and excited, I'm sure I'd encourage them.
Okay.
Sincerely or not?
I mean, Annie Fukuyama, I mean, she's
Koyama.
Koyama is sort of youngish, and she just started publishing a few years ago, and she's doing great work. I mean, you know, but you know, there are probably 30 people, you know, interested in starting a company, and she would be the one who does a great job of it. So, I mean, I think there's always room for new, you know, young publishers. There ought to be.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? All right. Well, then I'm going to ask a personal question. When I was a preteen, before I started reading the Comics Journal, I loved reading Amazing Heroes, which was a Fantagraphics magazine that published critical work about mainstream comics. And Amazing Heroes was a really important magazine to me. It was my first introduction to arts criticism. I think my first introduction to arts criticism, period. And it led me to discover alternative comics. And,
Me too.
And is Amazing Heroes something that you'd ever think about reviving? Because I think the recent explosion of
couldn't.
Image Comics and quality mainstream titles deserves something more and better than the comic sites that we have now. And
Yeah,
Amazing
they're
Heroes
not going
had
to get
the
it from
perfect
us.
tone.
I mean, I'm sure they do deserve better than whatever they're getting, but yeah, it's unlikely they're going to get it from us.
I do think TCJ.com, which is run by Dan Nadel and Tim Hodler, they've been doing a lot of fun stuff. I don't know if you follow Joe McCullough's weekly rundown, and he does everything. He does, you know, like more mainstream stuff, and I enjoy reading that. That's really fun. So I feel like a TCJ.com. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, the magazine.
TCJ.com is no Amazing Heroes.
Well, no, it is not. That is completely true. But I'm just saying, I think a lot of the roles that those magazines have been, they're more online. They are more ephemeral.
And
There's an entire internet now to write about that stuff, you know, and
Yeah, you know, Amazing Heroes. I mean, it's interesting to hear you say you were influenced by that. That Kim Thompson edited that, and I think we published 200 issues of it, if I remember correctly, and he edited most of them. And it was supposed to be an intelligent magazine devoted to mainstream comics, mostly mainstream comics. Although we did slip some alternative and independent stuff in there. But then, you know, during the '90s, things just got stupider and stupider.
it's true.
I mean, it was supposed to be sort of an intelligent alternative to the Buyer's Guide, which was itself brain damaged. And then Wizard came along around 1993, something like that. And, I mean, it increased exponentially the stupidity factor. And so it blew the Buyer's Guide out of the water because it was, you know, it was so meretricious and so brainless. And that's what led to the death of Amazing Heroes, because there was just no place for, you know, a reasonably intelligent magazine.
There was
about
that like
mainstream
renaissance
comics.
in the mid '80s, you know, of Frank Miller and Alan Moore, and then the '90s just went south really fast, you know.
And now you're publishing a comic with Rob Liefeld
right.
in it. So who's laughing now?
Ed Piskor is laughing.
So I think that's all the time we have. I want to thank the panelists for coming out, and I want to thank
thanks,
you all
Paul.
for listening. Be sure to visit their booth, 207.
after the show.
Thanks.
Our
Thank you
booth
very
is
much.
207, but Larry made sure I mentioned that. Come see us.
You couldn't go back to the booth if you didn't mention it.
Here, you can help yourself.